So you want to own Cloudflare. Here's the thing that surprises people first. This is not a low capital, started in your bedroom kind of business, and it's genuinely different from almost everything else in this series. You cannot bootstrap a global network that touches a meaningful share of the entire internet. What makes Cloudflare's story worth studying isn't that anyone could do this tomorrow. It's that the actual founding idea required almost no capital at all, and the giant, capital-intensive company only got built after that idea had already proven itself for free. And by the end of this video, I'll show you exactly how giving your product away for free turned into a $2.1 billion business with software-level profit margins. Let's start with how this actually began, because the real starting point wasn't Cloudflare at all. Level 0, the idea. Years earlier, Matthew Prince and Lee Holloway built something called Project Honeypot, a free, open, community-run tool that let any website owner plant fake email addresses to catch and track spammers, quietly building up a genuinely valuable, constantly growing dataset about who the internet's bad actors actually were. That project made no money. What it did was hand its creators a live, working threat intelligence dataset with no way yet to turn it into a business. The actual idea for Cloudflare came later when Prince, then a student at Harvard Business School, pitched the concept to his classmate Michelle Zatlyn. Instead of just telling website owners who the bad actors were, route their traffic through a network that could act on that data directly, blocking threats automatically while also making the site faster. Level 1, first funding. That plan won Harvard's own business plan competition in 2009, and later that year, Prince, Zatlyn, and Holloway raised $2.1 million from Venrock and Pelion Venture Partners to actually build it. That funding round is worth sitting with for a moment because $2.1 million is a genuinely modest amount of money to start what would eventually become a company protecting a meaningful share of the entire internet, and it's a direct result of the fact that the hardest, most valuable part of the idea, the actual threat data, already existed for free before a single investor ever wrote a check. The real starting move, the part worth paying attention to if you're looking for a lesson here, was how low friction the first product was. After a private beta, Cloudflare launched publicly at a conference called TechCrunch Disrupt in September of 2010, and the entire setup process was changing a domain's name servers to point at Cloudflare instead of somewhere else, a change that took less than 5 minutes, required no new hardware, and needed no code changes on the website itself. And critically, the core product was free from day one, not free as an introductory trial, genuinely free as the permanent plan for a small website owner, with paid add-ons like real-time analytics starting at $20 a month for anyone who wanted more. At launch, that free product was already delivering real, measurable results. Roughly 30% faster page loads, 60% less bandwidth used, and 65% less load on the origin server, for a small set of about 1,000 websites using it. Within about a year, monthly traffic across Cloudflare's network exploded from roughly 50 million page views to more than 5 billion. That explosive free growth wasn't just marketing. Every new free website made Cloudflare's threat data better and its network more efficient, which is exactly the flywheel that let a company built on giving things away for free eventually become genuinely enormous. Cloudflare eventually went public on the New York Stock Exchange in September of 2019, pricing its shares at $15 each, raising roughly $525 million at an implied valuation of about $3.8 billion, and its stock jumped 20% on the very first day of trading, a strong signal that public investors already understood the free-to-enterprise flywheel the company had spent nearly a decade building by that point. Level 2, the money machine. Now let's get into how the money actually works, because Cloudflare's revenue model is a direct, deliberate contrast to how this industry worked before it existed. The older, established player in the space, Akamai, founded back in 1998 by a small group of researchers including Tom Layton and Daniel Lewin, built its business the traditional way. Enterprise-focused sales teams, custom contracts, and pricing based on how much bandwidth the customer actually used, with essentially no self-serve or free option for a small business to just sign up and start using it. Daniel Lewin himself never got to see how large the company he co-founded would eventually become. He was killed aboard the first plane to hit the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, making him, by most accounts, the first victim of that day, a sober, real detail behind a company that's since grown into a genuine multi-billion-dollar rival sitting on the opposite side of the industry Cloudflare would later disrupt. Cloudflare flipped that completely, building a free, self-serve product first and only climbing up into large enterprise contracts once it had already proven the model at massive scale. Paid tiers today run from around $20 a month for a small business up through custom, much larger contracts for enterprise customers, and beyond that core business, Cloudflare has also built usage-priced products like Workers, letting developers run code directly on Cloudflare's network and pay based on how much computing time they actually use, charged in a way that specifically avoids the extra data transfer fees that competitors like Amazon typically add on top. All of this has scaled into real revenue. Cloudflare brought in roughly $287 million the year it went public, and by 2025 that number had grown to over $2.1 billion, growing at a remarkably steady rate of around 30% a year for years running. And underneath that total revenue number is a genuine shift happening in who's actually paying it. Customers paying Cloudflare more than $100,000 a year grew to well over 4,000, up more than 20% in a single year, and customers paying more than $1 million a year grew even faster, up over 50%, so that these large enterprise contracts now make up nearly 3/4 of all of Cloudflare's revenue, up from closer to 60% just a few years earlier. The free tier is still enormous and still matters enormously to the flywheel, but the actual money increasingly comes from exactly the large enterprise customers the free product was originally built to eventually attract. Level 3 free, but still profitable. Here's the part of this business that looks strange at first until you understand the actual mechanism behind it. Cloudflare gives away unmetered bandwidth and free protection against a category of attack called a distributed denial of service attack on every single plan, including the completely free one, while a major competitor like Amazon charges $3,000 a month with a full-year commitment just for their equivalent advanced protection tier. Cloudflare can afford to do this because of how their network is actually built. Rather than buying bandwidth at retail prices the way a smaller company would, Cloudflare connects directly with thousands of other networks around the world through a practice called peering, which means the real cost of moving another unit of data across their own network is far lower than what it would cost to buy that same bandwidth on the open market. Bandwidth that looks free to the customer is not actually free to provide, it's just genuinely cheap for Cloudflare specifically, in a way it isn't for companies without that same scale of direct network relationships. That efficiency shows up directly in the company's own financial statements too, in a number that looks almost more like a software company than a physical infrastructure one. Cloudflare's gross margin, the share of every revenue dollar left over after the direct cost of actually delivering the service, has consistently run somewhere in the mid to high 70% range, a figure far closer to a cloud software business than to a traditional telecommunications company hauling physical bandwidth around the world. Level 4. The real cost. Let's talk about the real cost of building something like this, because this is where the low capital story completely ends. Cloudflare's network today spans more than 330 cities in over 125 countries, engineered so that roughly 95% of the entire internet-connected population in the world sits within about 50 milliseconds of one of Cloudflare's data centers. That network directly connects with more than 12,000 other networks around the world and is estimated to carry somewhere around a fifth of all web traffic on any given day. Building and maintaining infrastructure at that scale, plus the ongoing engineering cost of developing products like their security suite and edge computing platform, is genuinely enormous, and it shows up directly in the company's financial history. Cloudflare posted real losses under standard accounting rules for roughly a decade after going public, only reaching consistent, strong free cash flow once its revenue had scaled past $1 billion a year. Even at that scale, a large share of every dollar coming in still goes right back into research and development, building out newer products like the Workers Edge computing platform, a full zero-trust security suite for large enterprises, and cloud storage products, because standing still in this industry means a competitor's next product release becomes the reason an enterprise customer's contract doesn't renew. Giving away a product for free and hoping to make it up later in enterprise contracts is a strategy that requires surviving years of losses first, funded by patient investors willing to wait, which is exactly why so few companies have successfully copied it, and why the ones who try it without that patient capital behind them tend to run out of runway long before the enterprise side of the business ever has a chance to catch up. And because a company like Cloudflare sits directly in the path of a meaningful share of the entire internet's traffic, when something goes wrong internally, it doesn't stay internal. In July of 2019, a single overly complex pattern matching rule, deployed as part of Cloudflare's own security software, accidentally spiked every processor core across their entire global network to 100% usage simultaneously, causing a genuine worldwide outage that dropped traffic by more than 80% for about 27 minutes. More recently, in November of 2025, a routine internal database permissions change caused an automatically generated configuration file to double unexpectedly in size, exceeding a hard-coded limit inside Cloudflare's own traffic routing software and triggering a crash that caused errors across a huge portion of the internet for roughly 6 hours. The specific mechanism was almost absurdly small in isolation. A database query that was supposed to filter its results stopped filtering correctly, so a configuration file that normally listed around 60 items suddenly listed more than 200, silently exceeding a hard limit of 200 that an engineer had written into the system's memory allocation logic, presumably assuming that limit would never actually be reached. And the software didn't fail gracefully, it crashed outright everywhere the file was used at once. An incident Cloudflare itself later described as its worst outage since that original 2019 incident. Neither of these was a cyber attack. Both were self-inflicted engineering mistakes, at a scale where a single internal mistake becomes a genuinely global event. What's kept trust intact through incidents like these is Cloudflare's own habit of publishing detailed, honest public explanations of exactly what went wrong within days of each incident, treating transparency itself as part of the actual product being sold to enterprise customers who need to trust this infrastructure completely. Level 5, the payoff. So what actually separates a company like Cloudflare from the competitors who've struggled to keep up? The first factor is the free flywheel itself. More free websites using the product means more threat data flowing in, which makes the product genuinely better for every customer, paying or not, which is a real, compounding advantage that a purely enterprise-focused competitor like Akamai never built into its own business. The second factor is capital discipline and patience, surviving roughly a decade of real financial losses on the bet that enterprise revenue would eventually catch up, which very few companies and very few investors are actually willing to sustain. The third factor is what happens when something inevitably breaks, because at this scale, something eventually will, and the winners in this specific business are the ones who respond with genuine transparency rather than silence, because enterprise customers trusting their infrastructure to a company that plays defense in public tend to stay loyal even after a real, painful mistake. A rival in this exact space, Fastly, learned this the hard way in 2021, when a single customer configuration change combined with a latent software bug knocked major sites like Amazon and Reddit offline for roughly an hour, a sharp reminder that any company built as critical internet infrastructure carries this exact same risk, regardless of how good its engineering usually is. Amazon's own CDN product, called CloudFront, represents a third, different kind of competitor entirely, a CDN sold as one small piece of a much larger cloud computing platform rather than a standalone company's entire reason to exist, which means Cloudflare, Akamai, and Fastly are all, in different ways, competing against a giant that can afford to treat this specific product as a loss leader for its broader cloud business if it ever chose to. And that's the payoff promised at the start. A business that gives away its core product for free, yet runs at software-level gross margins in the 70%, on more than $2.1 billion of revenue, carrying roughly a fifth of all web traffic on the planet. So if you're genuinely studying Cloudflare as a business, the honest lesson isn't start a company like this, because almost nobody realistically can. It's a lesson about sequencing. The idea that let Cloudflare eventually justify spending billions of dollars building physical, global infrastructure was proven for free first at almost no cost, through Project Honeypot's data and Cloudflare's own free tier, before a single dollar of that infrastructure spending ever happened. The giant, capital-intensive version of a business is very often built on top of a nearly free idea that already worked at a small scale, And the real skill isn't raising the capital to build the giant version first. It's recognizing which nearly free idea is actually worth eventually building that giant version around. Understand too that once you're operating at that scale, the job never really finishes. There's no version of this business where the network is simply complete, the security product is simply done, and the company can coast on what it already built, because the moment a company this deeply embedded in the internet stops improving, or stops being honest when something breaks, the giant infrastructure advantage stops mattering nearly as much as the trust that got built alongside it. If you enjoy deep dives into the economics behind real industries, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more business documentaries every week.